The SPLC and local progressive organizations must see something really effective in the American Redoubt political migration movement because they keep bringing it up and attacking it. The SPLC has defamed people who are somewhat associated with the American Redoubt concept multiple times in recent months, using half-truths, omissions, and outright lies. This time, the SPLC once again defames James Rawls, the person who created the American Redoubt concept. Let's go over the lies of the SPLC. The SPLC Heidi Beerich leads the SPLC Intelligent Project, which publishes highly defamatory and erroneous hate watch blog. Heidi recently published a blog post titled, "The Framer of a Far-Right Survivalist Movement in the Pacific Northwest Rang in the New Year by Warning of a Religious Civil War." First of all, the American Redoubt is not in the Pacific Northwest. Heidi, from Alabama. I think she's from Alabama or Georgia. I can't remember which. You'll get your facts correct. The article goes on to misrepresent what James Rawls said on his blog, survivalblog.com, about a potential upcoming civil war. Now, I personally don't use the term civil war in general because I don't think that what we're heading toward we would understand as what we would call a civil war. I generally call it political violence. I actually believe we're already in political violence. We're already in some form of a fourth generational warfare where groups like the SPLC are on one side and movements like the American Redoubt are the other. I truly believe we're already there. Again, also, I don't like to make predictions. In the financial area, they say never predict if the stock market will go up or down and when. You can predict when it goes up, you can predict when it goes down, but don't ever predict when. You know why? Because you're almost always wrong. Human nature is a fickle thing. Let me give you an example. This is like a thing called the National Intelligence Estimate, or NIE. This thing has over 17 U.S. government agencies and defense agencies and various departments participating in drafting documents for political leaders. When someone did an analysis of the public, of course, they produce unclassified and classified documents. When they did analysis of the public unclassified NIE predictions, when the NIE said this will happen, the NIE were accurate only 56% of the time. That's called 50-50. This is the best of the best. The highest paid thinkers in the American nation who do this for a living and get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars are right 50% of the time. So predictions to me are, I don't make them. With that being said, did James Rawls actually say anything dire or hateful with his prediction that we no longer live in a nation that agrees on much? Nah, he did not. Let me give you some examples. A guy named Thomas E. Ricks of the Foreign Policy Online blog asked a bunch of allegedly smart national security thinkers if we were headed toward an American Civil War. He said, and I quote, "I asked a group of smart national security thinkers that question the other day over my wild boar burger at Austin's Dai Do restaurant. I was surprised that the range of answers ran from 5% to 95%. I would say the consensus was 35%. Please note, the consensus is 35%, but not one national policy thinker said there was a 0% chance that America is not headed toward another American Civil War." Another globalist progressive online blog ran an article by a guy named Chris Arkenberg on the Foreign Policy Online magazine said, and I quote, "My gut says that the likelihood of a second U.S. Civil War in the next 5 years is somewhere between 20 and 40%, but trending upward significantly." So he agrees with the first online pundit. An article I found called Bonners and Partners, no far-right publication, published an article by Chris Lowe titled, "Preparing for the New American Civil War." Chris asked another guy, what's to blame for this situation? A guy named Nick Gummenberger, or Nick anyway, we'll call him Nick. He responded, "Identity politics are a big factor. That's when your religion, your race, your ethnic background, and so forth, I would add your gender, your sex, in this issue are the most important things in politics. You're no longer an individual American. You're part of some group, undoubtedly being victimized by another group. This naturally leads to collectivism, tensions, and eventually violence between the groups. Identity politics were a big factor in Lebanon's civil war, and they're a big factor in the U.S. right now. This poisonous trend is growing and is probably unstoppable. End quote. That's some heavy words by some guy who's pretty smart. The blog Medium, again, no seriously conservative blog, and the author Peter Layden, which I've already covered, which I'll put up here, previously says the best way to understand politics in America today is to reframe it closer to a civil war. Just a civil war label is harsh, and many people may cringe at it, because it brings up the concept of guns and deaths and the bodies of Union and Confederate soldiers screwing over the ground. Anyway, that's just me adding a little tisk. Returning to his quote, America today is nowhere near that level of conflict or at risk of such violence. However, America today does exhibit some of the core elements that move a society from what normally is the process of working out political differences toward the slippery slope of civil war. Thomas L. Friedman of the extremely liberal New York Times writes, and yet this moment feels worse, much less violently, blessedly, we agree on that, but much more broadly divisive. There is a deep breakdown happening between us and our institutions, and between us and our president. Agreed. David Kilcullen, former chief strategist in the State Department's Office of the Coordinator of Counterterrorism, David allegedly helped plan the successful surge in Iraq. Well, somewhat successful since we're still there. And he's seen a lot of civil wars in his time. He didn't consider a new U.S. civil war likely, but he also was pretty damn far from ruling it out. He said, and I quote, I think what we're seeing now is what I would describe as a proto-insurgency. Proto-insurgency. I kind of like that term, proto-insurgency. I might have to borrow that term from you, David. I like to use fourth generation warfare. Proto-insurgency sounds a little bit better. Situation. Anyway, returning to his quote, the ingredients are all out there. If someone knew what they were doing, they could pull together an effective movement. Colonel David continues, Colonel David Kolevan, a Marine Reserve officer who governed the Wasat province of Iraq after the start of the occupation, pointed out that insurgents can win without actually convincing anyone that they're right. It'd be enough to push most Americans into the both sides are evil camp, which isn't an unfamiliar place for most of us Americans to be. The Marine Corps Reservist Colonel continued. He also thought that any conflict was likely to start in a rural area. People talk about it like it's going to be class warfare. There's all these kind of people online talking that it's going to be race warfare. Is it going to be North versus South again? There's a whole bunch of people thinking about that. Personally, I think it's going to be urban versus rural, which, by the way, is very similar to what James Rawls said, which I think he's actually more accurate, where it's going to be more red state versus blue state. Probably more accurate is probably say red county versus blue counties. That's how the dividing line is. But this colonel continues, a few scattered bands of armed nuts won't make a civil war, as David explained. In insurgency theory, we typically break down the insurgency into three groups. The actual guerrilla fighters and what we call the auxiliary, those who run functional support networks. These are the illicit veterinarians who pull bullets out of hypothetical insurgents, the civilians who help feed and hide insurgents, and then the underground, kind of the controlling motivation. These guys engage in propaganda, assassinations, rob banks, and drive the movement forward. The guerrillas have the sexiest job, but they're nothing but armed men posing for Facebook photos without the support of a network. David explained that for every dozen armed guys, you need maybe 100 guys and gals in the auxiliary and maybe 1,000 guys in the underground movement. Once you get those three pieces together, now you're talking about a capable insurgency. By the way, I would disagree with a few of those numbers, but that is 100%, I would agree. Chris Lowe most likely has a point. We previously showed that a Pew Research poll showed that over 40% of American registered voters are concerned about another violent American Civil War in the next 5 years. So James Rawls' ruminations, or as we simple people call it, publicly chewing the cud on his blog, are in line with a significant percentage of retired military people, national security thinkers, registered voters, and many, many on both the left and the right. Thus, why in the world does the SPLC try to make James Rawls look like some type of anti-government extremist for simply advising his audience, which most likely is made up of a lot of conservative Christians, to prepare for what is possibly a violent future here in these disunited states? It's almost like the left understands what could happen. The left is preparing for what could happen. But anytime someone who's more conservative or right suggests that, hey, you might think about life assurance, not life insurance, but life assurance, the progressives and globalists get mad. Why do you think that is? Let me know in the comments below. And if you missed my video about the left's plan for civil war, click here. And for my other post video talking about how the left wants to turn all of America into California, click there. Viva Cristo Rey, Viva Cristo Rey, Viva Cristo Rey, y the Virgin of Guadalupe.